Have you ever wondered why the Titanic still remains at the bottom of the ocean? Why is it still shrouded in mystery and secrets almost a century after its fateful voyage? What makes this tragedy so captivating and compelling for so many people around the world? Get ready to uncover these secrets as we delve into the events surrounding the greatest maritime disaster in history. Step into a world of luxury, tragedy, and intrigue that surrounds the Titanic. Let's discover together why this ship continues to fascinate us so much. The Titanic was the largest ship in the world at the time, but its life was very short. Its maiden voyage began on April 10, 1912, and ended just 4 days later in tragedy, on the night of April 14th to the early hours of April 15th, 1912. In the sinking of the Titanic, 1,514 people died out of the 2,200 on board, making this tragedy one of the deadliest shipwrecks in history. Among the passengers were some of the wealthiest people in the world, along with hundreds of Irish, British, and Scandinavian immigrants seeking a better life in the US. The ship was designed to offer luxury and comfort. It had a gym, a swimming pool, a library, a fine dining restaurant, and fancy cabins for first-class passengers. And yes, you can access those luxuries too. Just like and subscribe to the channel. Of course, those in the lower classes did not enjoy these benefits. The Titanic was also equipped with the latest technology and advanced safety measures. However, due to regulations at the time, there were lifeboats for only 1,100 passengers, a little more than half of those aboard on its maiden voyage, and just a third of its total capacity. When it set sail, the Titanic departed from England, then stopped in France and Ireland before heading to America. But that journey was abruptly interrupted when the Titanic collided with an iceberg. The collision ripped open the ship and it began to flood. Over the next 2.5 hours, the ship gradually sank, first with the front part going down, causing the stern to rise. During this time, several hundred passengers and crew were evacuated in the lifeboats, nearly none of which were filled to their maximum capacity. During the disaster, a disproportionately high number of men died due to the women and children first rule. Shortly before 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, the Titanic broke in half and sank with hundreds still on board. Most of those left floating in the icy waters died from hypothermia. Only a few were rescued by lifeboats. It took several hours before another ship arrived to rescue the 709 survivors. The Titanic's sinking shocked and outraged the world due to the high number of casualties and the mistakes made during the disaster. Public inquiries held in the UK and the US led to significant improvements in maritime safety. Many of the survivors who lost everything in the tragedy were helped by public solidarity. However, others, like the owner of the ship, were accused of cowardice for abandoning the ship prematurely and condemned as murderers for the rest of their lives, as he was accused of pressuring the captain to increase speed to reach the destination faster, which led to the collision with the iceberg. We have this video here that talks about the sequence of absurd mistakes that caused the Titanic to sink. Now, the remains of the Titanic were lost for a long time, but were discovered on September 1st, 1985, at the bottom of the North Atlantic, at a depth of 12,500 feet, or 3,784 meters. Thanks to this discovery, thousands of artifacts from the ship have been recovered from the ocean floor and are now displayed in various museums around the world. The Titanic is perhaps the most famous ship in history, and its memory remains very much alive through countless books, music, films, exhibitions, and memorials. However, although much is known about the Titanic, there are several secrets that few people know, such as these 7. Number 7. The woman who survived. The company responsible for the Titanic also had 2 other accidents with the Olympic and the Britannic, and one Argentine woman survived all of them. Her name was Violet Jessup, and she worked as a stewardess on all three ships. First, in 1911, the Olympic had an accident, but no one died. Then, in 1912, the so-called Ship of Dreams, the Titanic, sank, and she, along with others, survived that cold and fateful night. Later, in 1915, she was aboard the Britannic when it struck a mine, causing severe damage and sinking the ship. She was on board and survived once again. Despite these experiences, she continued working on ships for another 35 years, retiring in 1950 at the age of 63 and living until the age of 84. Number 6. The humiliated Japanese passenger. Masabumi Hosono was the only Japanese passenger on the Titanic. He was a government employee, and when the Titanic sank, he boarded one of the few lifeboats reserved for women and children. When his story became known, he was dishonored, lost his job, and was heavily criticized in his country. The disgrace was so significant that when the film Titanic was released, he had already passed away, and his family took the opportunity to release a letter in which he apologized for his actions. Number 5. What the Titanic was really like. The Titanic was one of the few ships equipped with a swimming pool over 33 feet long and 13 feet wide. Additionally, the Titanic's first class featured a gymnasium, a squash court, Turkish baths, electric bathrooms, a cafe, a ship's terrace area, a restaurant, and smoking, reading, and relaxation lounges, as well as common areas decorated with incredible furnishings. Number 4. The last survivor of the Titanic. The last survivor passed away in May 1999 at the age of 97. Her name was Milvina Dean, and she was just 3 weeks old at the time of the sinking. She was also the youngest passenger aboard at the time. She was traveling with her older brother and parents, who had sold all their possessions in England and planned to open a tobacco shop in the US. However, her father perished in the disaster, and the rest of the family had to return to England. Number 3. The Mexican aboard the Titanic. Among the passengers, there was only one Mexican, Deputy Manuel Uruchurtu, who was in Paris on business at the time of the sinking. He gave up his spot to a passenger who explained that her son and husband were waiting for her in New York. Manuel only asked her to visit his wife in Veracruz and explain what had happened. She fulfilled this promise years later, in 1924, 12 years after the tragedy, and confessed that she no longer had a husband or children at that time. Number 2. A prophecy about the Titanic's sinking. 14 years before the Titanic's tragedy, Morgan Robertson wrote a novel called Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan, a fictional story about the largest ship in the world colliding with an iceberg in the North Atlantic on a cold April night. The ship in the novel was called Titan and was remarkably similar to the Titanic, even in its design, and met the same fate. This raises questions about whether it was a coincidence or a prediction. Number 1. Why the Titanic can't be raised from the ocean. Many wonder why the Titanic hasn't been raised from the ocean floor and turned into a museum or attraction, which would undoubtedly attract a lot of interest. However, the remains of the Titanic cannot be lifted from the sea because they are too deteriorated, and if attempts were made, the structure would crumble. Additionally, the deterioration process continues. Experts predict that by 2030, the Titanic will have disintegrated completely. The incredible thing is that when the Titanic was discovered in 1985, it was relatively well preserved due to the lack of light and the immense pressure at the ocean's depths, which made the site uninhabitable for most living organisms, thus slowing the corrosion process. However, everything changed a few years ago when a bacterium began corroding the metal. Surprisingly, this bacterium had never been seen before. If this unknown bacterium is feeding on the Titanic and turning it into a residue that will gradually disintegrate into the sea, This is the reason why the Titanic cannot be raised from the ocean.